Hello everyone, I am Dr. Ankita, MSL for Oncology in Glenmark, and I welcome you back to another episode of Oncology Podcasts. Today, our topic is the role of clinical trials, myths, benefits, and who can participate. And I'm very sure this conversation is going to help patients and their families understand clinical trials in a better way and also clear some of the misconceptions surrounding them. To guide us through this very important discussion, I'm extremely glad to announce that we have with us Professor Dr. Ghanashyam Biswas sir, HOD, Department of Medical Oncology, Sparsh Hospitals, Bhubaneswar. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Ankita.
So, starting with the very first question that I have on my mind, for patients who have no idea about what clinical trials are, could you please throw some light on exactly what clinical trials are, and also why is clinical trial so much important in advancing towards cancer care?
So that's a great question, and that is so important for a layman to understand. So I started my clinical trial journey in cancer way back in 2003 2004 during my DM curriculum at TMH Mumbai under Dr. Purvish Parikh. So till then, probably those misconceptions were there with me also, and it is prudent. And in today, in 2026, when so many discoveries are happening, so people should understand what does clinical trial means. So clinical trials are basically a research study which are well crafted, so by an institute or by a group of scientific reviewers, and which under the preview of a clinical trial establishment. So it can be an ethics committee of that institute or a neighboring institute. So where there are a number of peoples who form that committee. So these clinical trials, we are talking about a human clinical trial. So since we are discussing about cancers, so we know that so still in our part of the world we see a lot of cancers in advanced stage, and where many a times local therapies like surgery are not possible. So now you resort to, we do understand that cancer is a systemic disease. So either you require chemotherapy, hormonal therapy, or targeted therapies, immunotherapy. And now we are entering into a different era where ADCs, antibody drug conjugates, and bispecific or BiTE group of drugs. So in solid tumors and liquid tumors both are there. So with so much of drugs in kitty for a particular patient for a particular disease, so it has come from a clinical trial, and that is how the research is well crafted. And so why it is important, as I said, so because all therapies for an individual for a similar type of disease may not be the same. So that's why we are into an era of precision oncology, so where you require a tailor-based therapies for an individual. So if there are 5 individuals in front of you of the same disease, same stage, they may not require the same type of treatment. And this has all come through ages because of a clinical trial or because of a research study. So many a times it is formed by a group of like-minded people, maybe from the institute, or today we see many of these in country like us, which is a lower middle class countries where we are doing a biosimilar studies, so which are many a times driven from a pharma organizations. So this is what the cohort of a clinical trial in humans looks like.
Thank you so much, sir. That's really insightful. So that makes me ask you another question, sir. Many patients think that joining a clinical trial means they would be treated as guinea pigs. So could you please help clear this misconception as well?
Right. So clinical trials so goes through different phases. So we normally say the human clinical trial has phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. So what does phase 1 means? So phase 1 means a company has developed a drug which was probably an unmet need for a particular situation. So maybe in a advanced setting. So this drug, so first the proof of the pudding will be in a phase 1 where you look at the toxicity profile, the the safety profile, and the dosing. So you don't know the drug, like the paracetamol has come So whether you require 500 milligram or a 650 milligram. So this has come from a clinical trial. So we go through a phase 1. So once you're in phase 1, we find that this drug has an acceptable toxicity or a safety profile, and so you find a particular dose of 500 milligram or 650 milligram, and then you proceed to a phase 2. So phase 2, you keep on the safety and you look at efficacy. Now, for a particular, if I am talking about an advanced breast cancer, so now, so we have found out the safety. Now, is it effective in a suppose HER2 positive disease or not? So that is a phase 2. So now once you come through a phase 2, so this is all for a new entity drug. Now you have phase 3 for an HR2 positive, there is a well established treatment that's available. Suppose in an advanced disease, you know that today trastuzumab, pertuzumab with docetaxel is there or not. So that is the standard. So now, so you need to change the standard. So in one arm, so this is a TC. So trastuzumab, pertuzumab, and docetaxel is there. So now you need to change the therapy now. So you want to bring in some therapy which is either superior to the existing therapy in terms of efficacy or less toxic than the existing therapy. So if you prove that in a phase 3, then you know that this is a positive trial. So either you look at a superiority or a non-inferior trial. So in terms of efficacy, or you are looking at the existing treatment is providing survival, but at the cost of toxicity, or the existing treatment is efficacious and manageable toxicity, but probably our patients population or the large scale of patient may not be able to take that treatment. So you are bringing in a new treatment with the existing treatment. That is a phase 3. Now the phase 3 is clear. Now the company has marketed this drug, suppose in some part of the US, and for that there is an FDA approval. When it comes to us in our country, India, then they have to go through the Indian FDA, or what you say is the DCJ, which is based in Delhi. And then, so they will require that these patients, a good number of patients for biologicals, the particular amount of patients, or different drugs, you'll have a particular amount of patients you require. So which is changing with time as per the DCJ norms. So now it has to be tested. This is a phase 4 study. The drug has come through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. This is now approved by FDA. Now we have to see what is happening in a real world situation. So what I talked about, that was a randomized control trial. So randomized control trial means there are many patients who may not be eligible because of the performance status, because of abnormality in the routine blood tests, and they escape. So they are not entered in the clinical. So the clinical trial usually includes 18 to 65. The patient is 66 years, they are excluded from the trial. The patient has a creatinine of 1.3, they may not be eligible for the clinical trial. But in a real world, this 1.3 or a 66-year-old a lady for a breast cancer is an eligible patient. So you treat them in a phase 4 study, and you show them that real world and the randomized control trials are not different. So that is why the phase 4 is normally said as a post-marketing survey. So people think as a guinea pig, so that is a wrong concept, because clinical trials before coming to humans, so they will come through guinea pigs. So that was in the lab, in the animal lab, so that does happen. So we are talking about human trials, which is from phase 1 to phase 4, and there are good number of phase 1 studies which are done in the country. There are very, very big CROs that does it. So it is not a guinea pig. So it is in the minds of many of the patients, patient attendants, and unfortunately in the doctor fraternity also, especially who has never done a clinical trial, or who has not done a clinical trial, or never exposed to a clinical trial, which are well designed and which is governed by the FDA or a DCJ. So that is the probably a misnomer or a conception, misconception that probably rolls down in the society. So be it a layman, be it even in the medical fraternity who have never been exposed to a clinical trial.
Thank you, sir. That's a lot of clarity, I think. And many of our patients will finally get rid of this major common misconception now. Another thing that I wanted to ask you was that many patients think that clinical trials are only for those who have exhausted all treatment options. Is that so? Or are clinical trials limited only for patients who are newly diagnosed?
So absolutely. This is again a myth among many people. So there can be a cohort. So when we entered into a clinical trial where there is an unmet need, so patient had exhausted first line, second line, and a third line, which are in the approved guidelines. So somebody has, like I can say, the best example of 2026, and every patient asked us is a pancreatic cancer. So pancreatic cancer, so till last 2 decades or more, so we had not moved an inch in survival in terms of beyond chemotherapy. And now ASCO 2026, so last month only, so there's a breakthrough after almost 2 decades of a pan-RAS inhibitors. So there is a new drug which is very difficult to pronounce, so daraxonrasib. So that is basically a RAS trial has shown that the survival in a second line, which was 6 months, so probably, and now the survival is almost double, so 12 and a half and 3 months, 13 months. So this is probably the first time in 2 decades that has happened in a pancreatic cancer, which is said to be a very difficult to treat disease. So now, for a pancreatic cancer, so after a well-established first line of treatment, which is normally for oncology community will understand either FOLFIRINOX or a nab-paclitaxel gemcitabine, so there was no established second line of treatment. So the patient may not be fit for another injectable in the second line, and 40-50% patient drop out. So here, so there the patient problem exhausted treatment, so new drug was required. There are many cancers today, so where we are moving into the first line in a curative setting. So maybe in an adjuvant setting, maybe in a neoadjuvant. So neoadjuvant breast cancers. So we have moved up quite an inch in terms of curative setting. So sometime back, if I say a HER2 positive breast cancers after neoadjuvant treatment has a residual disease, we are giving an X drug showing a survival of X amount. Now, since 2025 ASCO, so there is a new drug which is probably replacing the previous drug because that is showing a better survival. But that is a curative, so there are options. So it doesn't mean that when you have exhausted treatment, so you want to go into a clinical trial. So there is a patient who even is a treatment naive. So they can also go into a clinical trial if that is available near his vicinity. So clinical trials in oncology are not only for drugs, so it can be for a diagnostic tools, it can be for a surgery, it can be for a radiotherapy. So clinical trials are happening into every space of oncology. And so the most common situation what is seen in oncology, especially in medical oncology, there was an existing drug of rituximab of an original company. Now you want to have a biosimilar drug. So the patient goes into either one arm the biosimilar, the other arm will be the original drug. So the patient will get the same treatment, only it is a biosimilar versus an original drug. Second is there is no standard of treatment, like as I said, a pancreatic cancer. So somebody will be on a placebo or standard therapies that is available. So in real life, what you give? So in the other arm, the experimental drug of pan-RAS inhibitor was given and it showed a positive trend. So it is basically a bench to bedside. So the bench to bedside means something which our scientists have developed a drug for over a decade or so, and then that goes into the market after passing through all these phases of clinical trial, and then we start using in our patients in a real life situation, that is at the bedside. So as your question stands, So it's not only the patients in an exhausted state when the patients have lost all options, but even in a curative setting, even with the existing treatment that's available. So as I said, we look at a more efficacious treatment. The pathological CR with chemotherapy was 30%. With using a dual agent, dual antiartrogen, they moved to 60%. Now with a better drug, that is ADC, so we have moved inch to 75 to 80% of pathological CR, because we understand that pathological CR in a cancer like breast, in a triple negative HER2 positive, so that will translate into a survival. So that's how we have evolved over time.
So that cleared a lot of doubts both for the patients and their families. That said, I wanted to ask you, what are the potential benefits of joining a clinical trial both for the individual patients and for future patients?
So once we move one step ahead, so what are the benefits? First is a resource. So there is an existing drug, but patient may not be able to pay from the pocket. Patient may not be able to avail from the government schemes that are available, or the patient probably can afford for 3 months, 6 months, and then probably may not be able to continue the treatment. So these patients, if there is an existing trial, and in 2026 it is easy because placebo trials in one arm, the placebo controlled trial is not seen. The patient is going to get a standard of therapy. So that somebody has to understand that you are not being a guinea pig, but you are also not getting a minimum standard of treatment. So you are getting a standard treatment. The only difference is that original versus a biosimilar. So if you are lucky, if you are randomized to the original, you may get the original, which probably you won't have to pay a single penny. If you go to the biosimilar, which has already come through all phases, and then probably, so you are getting a standard of therapy. So I think so. This should be important. So in those cases, second, there is a new treatment, as I said, in pancreatic cancer, so where so they can get the benefit. Now there are n number of patients may or may not be affording. The richest person in the world may not be able to get that drug because that must be an astronomical cost. Because now that will go to a company, so it will have a patent for 5 to 10 years before it actually will be benefited to large number of patients. So now, some time back, there was a hue and cry about a Russian vaccine, which was an RNA vaccine. The similar. So now many of our colleagues have put on their WhatsApp status that please don't ask about the Russian vaccines. The pan-RAS inhibitors is not available to individual in our country. So they have to go to that US particular institute to get the drug on it, if at all, in a compassionate ground. And third, suppose somebody exhausted all treatments, so now you want to have some treatment, so where there are no existing treatment, or that space is empty at that moment, so you enter into a clinical trial. So if you are benefited with the drug, then it's good and fine. Then you contribute back to the society, you contribute back to the science. So there are good number of patients in time to come, they will be benefited. Second, so either the patient loses his life because of the disease process, or because while on treatment, which may or may not be attributed to the drug, so they are being compensated. So that is sort of insurance. So we people do our insurance. So everybody of us do a term life insurance. We do our health insurance. We do our life insurance. So in a clinical trial which is well conducted, which comes through the DCG or FDA, so that absolutely has insurance, and the whole insurance it depends upon if there are SAEs, means the serious adverse events not amounting to death, the amount of wages lost. So there is a formula for calculation. So a teacher will get an X amount, a carpenter will get an X amount, and if this somebody is an official, so they'll get an X amount if there's a stand SAEs. If somebody die, as I said, so because of the disease process, because of the treatment, may or may not be the related to the particular drug in question of the clinical trial, so they will again be compensated. So this is absolutely on paper. So there is no hide and seek unless you have fallen into a trap of a something which is not ethical. Then only, otherwise in ethical trials in the most of the institutions in the country, so you will be secured. So the family will be reimbursed as per the norms that's applicable in the DCGI today.
Thank you so much, sir, for making our patients understand this in such a simplified manner. So, now that we have already talked about the pros of clinical trials, I just wanted to talk to you about the risks associated with clinical trials. Also, how are patient safety and ethics protected here?
So I've also answered a part of this question in the previous answer. So if something goes wrong, so which normally can go in an advanced disease, because there are no treatments that are available or the patient may not be able to afford. So ultimately the patient will have a natural course of the cancer journey, and the ultimate thing is the death. So it may be a progressive disease, it may be because of the ongoing systemic therapy that has been advised or advocated to the patient. So as I said, in clinical trial for a serious adverse events, which is amounting to admission for the patients, and they will be compensated for that. And for the death, so if it is related to the drug, then they will have again a compensation, which are formula based, which are again laid down by our DCGI. So these patients have, and this goes to the ethics committee, not only on the institutes but also if there are 20 centers participating in the country. So that document goes to these 20 centers, and then there is a consensus. So after 3 to 6 months, within 3 to 6 months, the patients are compensated. So that's the other part, the flip part of the clinical trial. They are compensated. So absolutely, that's in place.
Thank you so much, sir. That's a lot of clarity for our patients. Does joining a clinical trial increase the financial burden of a patient or and their family, or are generally the whole cost of study treatment is covered by the respective organization?
So absolutely, if the patient is on a ethical clinical trial in a particular institute, every expenses of the patient during the treatment, and there are many protocols where of the treatment for a particular, suppose you want to have a survival follow-up, you want to have a long-term toxicities, so you follow up for 6 months to 6 years, or even till an event happens. So these are covered. So what are being covered? So the patient comes to the center where the routine blood tests, the imaging part, that is covered. If the patient requires an ECG echo, that is covered. And the whole treatment, so it is an oral drug or intravenous drug, they are covered. The whole treatment expenses, suppose even in a patient who are in a clinical trial in a private institute, so they don't have to pay even a single penny as a consultation, or or a chemotherapy charges, which are normally asked for a particular patient who are not into a clinical trial. And there are many patients who come from a poor background, so where even the travel expenses are given. So there are situations when the patient has to stay back with at least one attendant for a PK sampling, so which are done at different intervals, which can be for a day, which can be for, so day 1, day 3, and day 5. So again, so these patients are either housed in the hospital, or they stay nearby in a accommodations of their choices nearby hospital, because there are certain amount fixed by the clinical trial groups. So it can be a 500 rupees per day and 1000 rupees per day. So even that is also taken care of during the clinical trial. So there are patients who, even we have seen that during the COVID time. So because we are running a clinical trial of an FDA clinical trial for a particular drug in breast cancers in the COVID time, which was really difficult, because at that point of time, the patients traveling from a part of Western Odisha, so where normally would have charged for a 5,000 rupees of car rent. the patient had to pay 15 because there were so much restrictions. The patient has to pay 15,000. The patients were not coming to the center. So even in those situations, so we have paid 15,000 rupees because the patient had to come to the centers. It was a difficult time for everybody who has done a clinical trial. The recruitment was halted, the recruitment got delayed, and the samples were not going, especially if the sample has to go outside the country. So those were exceptional situations. Otherwise the patients are absolutely. So if something happens in terms of toxicities, even so that is also compensated. The treatment is taken care of, plus the compensation is also there.
I think many of our patients will now be relieved finally, sir. If a patient, after joining a clinical trial, feels uncomfortable, is it possible for him or her to withdraw from the trial?
Right. So if the patient is not clinically benefited, so normally as a PI, so I withdraw the patient from the clinical trial. If the patient has some hardships, so many times the hardships is somebody XYZ has said that, as you rightly said from the beginning, so you were being treated as a guinea pig. So there are patients who comes out of the clinical trial. Third is the most difficult part is we have seen in our population. The patient comes for first cycle, second cycle, and then third cycle is delayed. My son's marriage was there was some casualty at home, so they take it very lightly, because in a clinical trial when everything you are getting it free, so it doesn't mean that, so it is costing someone some amount, right? So many patients doesn't understand that, so they take their own time. So in clinical trials usually, so you can delay things by a few days or few weeks. After that, then the patient has to be dropped from the clinical, and it has happened. The patient was doing good, but patient has been dropped. So when the patient finds suitable time and come back, and then or the patient disease has started progressing, they come back and want to go get into clinical time, that's not possible. And the fourth situation can be patient is experiencing toxicities. So many a time that may not be a visible toxicities. Patient can probably experiencing fatigue. The patient may not be able to come for frequent blood sampling if it is a pharmaco kind of PKPD studies. So the patients can always opt out. So because we have to enter into the source note that the patient has dropped out for what reason. So is it that the PI has made the patient drop out because of toxicity, or because of a lack of efficacy of the drug, or the patient has dropped out because of logistic, or the patient has dropped out because of experiencing particular toxicity which is probably in a day to day he is unable to manage. So these are situations, so they can absolutely go out, and if they want to go back to the normal routine or the existing treatment which is beyond a clinical trial, so they can always come back to the same physician and get back to the normal routine treatment.
Sir, I think that's a lot of clarity for our patients as well, because this is, I'm pretty sure most of our patients must be wondering about. So, as we've come towards the end of this conversation, sir, any last piece of advice for the caregivers or the patients who have considered joining a clinical trial?
So today, so every individual in the country, so they have a smartphone. So they go through various YouTube channels. They go through various and googling out very things. So it's so many things. So I think so patients may be educated, may not have so much of formal educations. The caregivers, the primary physicians, or a fellow colleague who is treating. So everybody should understand that it's time that you contribute back to science, you contribute back to society. So without a research, so probably you won't see a future. So you have seen there are certain countries in the world who are really advancing because they believed in science, they believed in research, they believed, and that's how they are progressing. I'll request my fellow colleagues, fellow oncologists, that so wherever there is available a clinical trial in your vicinity, in your city or a neighboring cities, so we should refer your fellow colleagues for the enrollment in a clinical trial. That can be a situation in a curative setting, that can be a situation in a palliative setting. Like I have a clinical trial on Hodgkin's curative disease. I have a trial in a treatment name of multiple myeloma where many people may not be able to afford the drug like daratumumab. So I think so that's the message, that so don't shy away from clinical trial, and don't hesitate in participating or referring your own patients to a clinical trial. And so once the patient is off the clinical trial protocol, they will be referred back to you so for further treatment. So that won't be these patients won't be staying back with the physician that was referred for a clinical trial. So they are going to go back. So they will be with us or the clinical trial participants or the PI till they are on the clinical trial and the required follow-up. Rest, they will go back to the primary physicians where they have come from. So it's time that we should uh, try to enroll patients. So not only in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. So all these patients should come, because there are registry trial also. So these may not fall into a phase 1 to phase 4, but there is registry trial. So even we are doing for few of these companies. So we wanted to look at our population, so how they are behaving. So it can be collecting. So it's sometime back we collected a stage 3 lung cancer, and now we are now collecting what are the biomarkers that has been doing in a GE cancers and gastric cancer in a advanced staging. So we started doing HER2, then MMR, then CPS, and now Claudin 18.2. So this is how we look at the practice of our physicians, and it will differ from cities to cities and state to state. And then probably we collate and then make a guidelines which akin to our patient population. So which we may not be probably doing what NCCN or the ASPO guidelines says, or what has been laid by the many other institutes of repute. So I think it's time that we should not, at the end, so we should not shy away from clinical trials, and we should not get panic buttons. So if we hear something about clinical trials, so when your treating physician says that there is a clinical trial available and you should get enrolled if you are screen eligible, because each clinical trial have an inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria. So from the prima facie, you may look like that you are eligible for the clinical trial, but for subsequent, once you give a consent, so I'm in Odisha, practicing in Odisha, so we have a consent form for English, Hindi, and Odia. Somebody who is in Bengal, they will have a Bengali. So otherwise, if somebody is Gujarati, then we tried, because if he or she doesn't understand the other languages, then we have to have a consent form in their language, so that you give time to the patient and the attendants to read through. So there is nothing that is undisclosed. So you send them, so give them time, because in a counseling you need to get them time, because otherwise patients may not be able to understand. So many a times in our population, patient may be sitting outside, so we need to explain properly to the caregivers or the attendant that has come. So this is important, and once you go through the screening process, then the all reports comes in hand in next 4 or 5 days. So including if there is in a lung cancer trial, because there are lots of biomarker and lots of biosimilar immunotherapy trials going on in centers, so where you require in a lung cancer NGS, so ruling out EGFR, ALK and ROS, you need to have a PD-L1 report. So this takes time. So if you already have in hand, so it can be done in 5 days. If those reports are not in hand, then it will take 2 to 3 weeks, and then you place them in order. Then you have to look if it is fitting into the inclusion criteria, and then you have to fitting into the exclusion criteria or not. So if you are doing absolutely fine, and on a blood report, so inclusion is fine, exclusion, and then suddenly you find that hepatitis B positive or HIV positive, which was not known to the patient, or the patient physician did not know, and then these patients will be excluded from a clinical trial of oncology. So he may be eligible for a clinical trial which is for an HIV, but for an oncology perspective, he or she may not be eligible for those. Or the patient on routine evaluation found to have a cardiac disease which he was not aware, and that was probably a grade 2 or grade 3. So these patients may not be eligible. On a routine scan, you find there are issues in the liver or a kidney, which was again not known to the patient. So these patients may not be eligible. So these are situations when you think on a prima facie this patient is for a clinical trial, but they have to meet the basic inclusion and exclusion criteria that has been laid by the particular clinical trial.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for encouraging our patients and also for such a detailed discussion. Undoubtedly, this is one of the most insightful discussions and unique discussions that we have had in the past few months. Completely relevant to our patients, clearing all the misconceptions that they have. Thank you again, sir, for taking out time from
Thank
your
you.
very busy schedule. We'll look forward to many more episodes in the near future and welcome you back.